The clay court season always arrives like a slow burn. Madrid is humming, lights up, stands full, that familiar orange dust drifting off the baseline as the best players in the world try to find their slide before Paris swallows them whole. We're right in the middle of it. Chinese letter is building. And then without warning the French Open entry list drops. Not a rumor, not a leak. The actual official document that tells every player on tour exactly where they stand. For the men, it's business as usual, but for the women, that's where things get strange. That's where you start reading the names twice because something doesn't line up. Let's be clear about what the entry list should have shown. At the top, predictable power, Sabalenka, Goff, Swiatek, the usual fortress. Pegula, Anisimova, Svitolina, Paulini filling out the top 8, the machinery of rankings grinding forward exactly as expected. But then you get past the obvious names, past the protected rankings and the special exemptions, and you hit a section of the list that usually belongs to seasoned travelers, players who have bled ranking points across 3 continents just to hold their spot. Except this time, there's a new name sitting where a veteran's name used to be, and that's when the tennis world started tilting its head. Paula Badosa should have been a certainty, not a maybe, not a if she gets a wild card. A certainty. She has done the work. She has climbed the rankings the hard way, through injuries that would have ended other careers, through slumps that tested every ounce of her famous mental grit, through matches where she had to remind herself that she belonged in the conversation. Her game, built on that heavy baseline aggression and a forehand that can flatten a rally into submission, has always been clay-friendly. She has beaten the best. She has stood on the biggest courts and not blinked. So when the entry list arrived and her name was not where logic said it should be, and instead Alex Eala's name appeared in the main draw, direct entry, no qualifying rounds, the reaction wasn't just surprise. It was a slow, creeping kind of disbelief. The kind that makes you check the document twice. The kind that makes you wonder if the sport changed its rules while nobody was watching. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that the entry list exposed. Alex Eala did not climb into this position through the traditional, grinding, tournament-by-tournament accumulation of points that has always been the currency of professional tennis. She arrived differently, louder, more visibly, the kind of arrival that doesn't wait for permission. Rewind a few months, the Australian Open, that's where the first real tremors started, not because Eala made a shocking run to the quarterfinals, she didn't, but because something unusual happened around her matches. Fans started showing up early, not early as in 15 minutes before first ball, early as in lining up outside the gates before dawn. Small courts meant for developmental matches were overflowing. Security had to redirect crowds. Social media lit up with footage of Filipino fans, hundreds of them, then thousands packed into walkways, waving flags, holding handmade signs, waiting for a glimpse of a player who was still ranked outside the top 50. That is not normal. That is not the kind of attention that follows a few good results. That is the kind of energy that attaches itself to a cultural moment. And it didn't stop in Melbourne. By the time the tour reached the Miami Open, Eala was no longer a curiosity. She was a storyline. The tournament directors noticed. The broadcasters noticed. Her matches were drawing crowds that rivaled top 10 players. The Filipino diaspora, massive, passionate, historically underserved in global tennis, had found their champion, and they showed up like it was a national holiday. One commentator put it bluntly, "If I was a tournament director, I would do anything for her to be at my tournament. I'd also make sure she's on schedule every day, singles and doubles, because people come to watch Alex and then they stay for more tennis." That's not hype, that's market reality. Even at Indian Wells, where she didn't dominate the field, she showed something arguably more important than winning: growth. Analysts began pointing out her improved tactical awareness. Her shot selection had matured from reactive to intentional. She was constructing points instead of surviving them. Her composure in high-pressure moments, those deuce games that can unravel young players, had hardened into something resembling veteran calm, and the tennis world started taking notes. Then came the endorsements that matter, not sponsorship deals, the other kind. Rafael Nadal, who has forgot more about clay court tennis than most players will ever learn, spoke about her with a respect that sounded almost protective. Maria Sharapova, who knows exactly what it means to transcend tennis and become a global brand, recognized in Eala not just athletic potential but cultural gravity. When those two talk, people don't just listen. They adjust their assumptions. So now you have Roland Garros, the most physically demanding Grand Slam in tennis, a tournament that has broken tougher players than Alex Eala, looking at an entry list and making a decision. Do they stick to the cold, hard arithmetic of rankings? Do they make her fight through 3 rounds of qualifying, where experienced professionals grind each other into dust for a single spot? Or do they recognize that modern Grand Slams are not just sporting events anymore? They are global entertainment platforms. They need players who bring narratives, who attract diverse audiences, who expand the sport's reach into new markets. And Alex Eala, as a Filipina athlete rising on the world stage, brings with her an entire region of passionate fans who see her as more than just a player. She is representation. She is possibility. She is, in real time, becoming the most important tennis player the Philippines has ever produced. Direct entry, no qualifiers, a seat at the table that used to belong to someone else. But that someone else, Paula Badosa, is not going to fade quietly into the background. That's not who she is, that's not how she built her career. Badosa has survived things that would have broken most athletes. A stress fracture in her back that made her wonder if she'd ever serve again. A ranking freefall that could have sent her into early retirement. Months of rehabilitation that tested not just her body but her sense of identity. And she came back, not diminished, not cautious, but fiercer. She rebuilt her game, clawed her way back into contention, and proved that her top 10 status wasn't a fluke, it was a foundation. So what happens when a competitor like that looks at the French Open entry list and sees a rising star leapfrog into a main draw spot that, by traditional logic, should have required years of grinding? What happens inside that quiet kind of disbelief? The kind that doesn't need words to be felt? Badosa is not the type to complain publicly. That's not her style. But privately, that fire is already lit. And nothing motivates a seasoned competitor more than feeling overlooked. Nothing sharpens the focus like a perceived injustice. If Badosa walks into Roland Garros with something to prove, not just to the tournament directors but to the entire sport, then she becomes an entirely different kind of threat. The kind who plays not for ranking points but for pride, and that is often more dangerous than any top seed. Now let's talk about the clay, because Roland Garros is not forgiving. It doesn't care about fan counts or social media metrics. It doesn't care about national pride or market expansion. Clay demands patience, it demands endurance, it demands a mental resilience that has broken more experienced players than Alex Eala. The long rallies become psychological warfare. The bounces become unpredictable. The crowd, famously passionate, famously fickle, can turn on you if you show weakness. Eala is walking into an environment where she is no longer the hungry underdog sneaking into the main draw. She is expected to compete, and expectation is a heavier thing to carry than hope. Her preparation has reportedly intensified. Her team has been drilling movement on clay, that specific sliding footwork that separates clay specialists from hard-court baseliners. They've been working on point construction, on shot selection, on the kind of defensive retrieval that turns lost points into extended rallies. The question is not whether she has the talent. She clearly does. The question is whether she has the patience to construct points over 15, 20, 30-shot rallies when her natural instinct is to finish them in 4. If she finds that balance, she becomes genuinely dangerous. If she doesn't, the same aggression that made her a fan favorite could turn into a series of unforced errors and frustrated racket smashes, and the clay will punish every single one. But here is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating and genuinely unpredictable. Because Eala's rise has not been flawless, she has inconsistencies, matches where her level dropped inexplicably, moments where inexperience showed through. That's not a weakness in the narrative, it's actually what makes her story compelling. Fans are not watching a finished product, they are watching a player evolve in real time. Every victory feels earned, every loss feels like a lesson. And that authenticity, that rawness, has only deepened her connection with audiences. The Filipino fans in particular have turned her matches into events, not just tennis matches, cultural gatherings. When Eala plays, flags come out, chants start before she even walks onto the court. Social media explodes with live reactions. It's not unusual to see hundreds of fans waiting outside her practice sessions, hopping for a selfie or an autograph. One commentator described it as a phenomenon, not an exaggeration. Tournaments where attendance had been flat in previous years suddenly saw spikes when Eala's name appeared on the schedule. That is not something you can manufacture. That is genuine fandom. And the tennis business knows exactly what that's worth. Which brings us back to the central question hanging over this entire situation. Is this the beginning of a genuine power shift in women's tennis, where rising stars like Alex Eala start redefining the hierarchy based not just on results but on influence, on marketability, on the ability to bring entire nations into the sport's tent? Or is this simply a moment of hype, a temporary disruption that will eventually settle back into the established order, where rankings and results remain the only currencies that matter? The answer probably lies somewhere in the middle, because the truth is that tennis has always been a sport of dual currencies. On the court, results are king, but off the court, attention is power. And right now, Alex Eala has both. She has the momentum of a player on the rise, fueled by performances that continue to capture attention. And she has the kind of global appeal that tournaments actively seek. That combination is rare, that combination is valuable. And the French Open's decision to give her direct entry, controversial as it may be to traditionalists, is simply an acknowledgement of that new reality. But here is the final, most compelling layer of this story. The French Open hasn't been played yet, the draws haven't been made, the balls haven't been tossed. Everything we're talking about, the hype, the controversy, the narratives, it all still has to survive contact with the actual sport. And on clay, the sport has a way of humbling everyone. The question isn't whether Alex Eala deserves her spot. The question is what she does with it. Will she rise to the occasion, justify the faith placed in her, and announce herself as a genuine force? Or will the weight of expectation, the crowds, the flags, the eyes of a nation, prove too heavy for someone still learning how to slide on red clay? And what about Paula Badosa? Will she channel this quiet injustice into a career-defining run? Will she remind everyone that rankings, for all their flaws, are still built on years of results? Will she walk onto that clay with something to prove and leave with something to say? That's the beauty of tennis. You don't get to skip the matches, you don't get to debate your way into the second week. You have to go out there on the red dirt in the Parisian sun with a racket in your hand and a scoreboard that doesn't care about narratives. And somewhere in that arena, between the first serve and the final point, the real story will be written. Not by tournament directors, not by social media metrics, not by entry lists, but by two women on opposite sides of the net, deciding in real time who belongs and who gets to stay. So no, this isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning. And the only thing that's certain is that when Roland Garros finally arrives, the entire tennis world will be watching not just the scoreboard but the quiet, ruthless mathematics of what happens when potential finally meets reality.